Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Habibis, three game developers drinking good Arab tea. I'm your host for this week, Osama Dorius.
وأنا فوزي مسمار.
And I'm Rami Ismail.
All right, folks, what have you played this week?
I don't know. I mean, this is not going to be very exciting. I played Mass Effect, which we talked about for literally 45 minutes or 30 minutes last week. I finished the first one, which
Mom,
was.
you need to tell us that you haven't finished 3 games in a week. We're very disappointed. Those are short games, man.
I honestly tried, but Mass Effect 1 truly is a bit of a slog, right? I spent like a good 20 hours of my week driving around what is basically just, train matrices in the Mako, trying to get up very steep hills and cursing at the screen, which obviously last week it was okay to curse. This week we're back to our normal non-cursing episodes, which means I can't fully express how much I didn't like the Mako segments.
Yeah.
But the thing about Mass Effect is it still holds up. It holds up in that way that the things that were clever about the game are still clever.
Yeah.
The things that were bad about the game are worse now.
Yeah.
Right? It's just time. Time made us see how much better those things could be. But I think we've discussed this before as well. It's like the first game was clearly just an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't know what they were making. They didn't know whether it was going to work. They knew that they were starting from sort of like their knowledge from Dragon Age, presumably, but that they were going to do a sci-fi opera epic shooter game. Like this is a studio with no experience in shooters, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me think of that time Bungie originally thought that Destiny would be a fantasy game. Right, that would be as big of a hop for a studio like Bungie that has done shooters for such a long time. I mean, they've done Myth, I think, back in the days, but they were mostly a shooter studio, and for them to go fantasy would have been really hard. The same way to going sci-fi must have been really, really hard for BioWare.
For Mass Effect. But you could see a little bit of that fantasy DNA even in like the alien races and the like. I think it gave it a very interesting flavor.
Right.
I also played a little bit of Mass Effect. I didn't finish the first one like you did. I guess I don't play for. I don't have as much time to play in a week as you do, or I don't know, whatever. But worse time management. But the first week I played the Legendary Edition. I did the whole Citadel part. The second week I fought the first boss. I don't know if these count as spoilers because they're extremely vague, and if you haven't played the game, you have no idea what I'm talking about. So I think it's fine. And now I'm starting in that second sequence, even though it's like it's not exactly chronological. You could do it in any order, but like I'm pretty much playing it. I told myself I was going to play it differently than the last time, and I've pretty much made every decision exactly.
I couldn't change anything. The only thing that has changed is my romance, because in the first one it's really hard to get the romanceable characters to back off from you, so it's kind of a coin flip as to who you end up with.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to end up with either of them, but it didn't work this time. So I ended up in a romance. But I think that the thing that's clever about Mass Effect, and that now with. Because the last time I played this, I wasn't a game developer. And sure, I had an interesting game design, but I hadn't quite looked at games and narrative structure and gameplay structure. I think the thing that's clever about Mass Effect 1 is the way it folds its narrative structure.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really cleverly done, where you have your pretty straightforward linear opening sequence. And then the game sort of like opens up with 3 main missions that you can play in any order. The order in which you play those missions affects minor things about the narrative in those missions, but it doesn't have big, meaningful changes in the outcome of those missions. Then after 2 of those, you get a sort of like a block mission, like the mission that sort of folds the narrative back together.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you have a final narrative mission that sort of like pushes you towards the exit, right? So you do this intro, fold out, fold in, and forward. But the fold out, fold in part, you can do that in any order, and also you don't actually have to complete it to continue. which makes it feel like you have tremendous freedom. Everything feels sort of natural. The side quests appear and disappear based on which of the main quests you've done. So at any given point, stuff is happening. The narrative is moving forward. Things are evolving. Your understanding of the situation grows. They've written sort of like a narrative, sort of like an explanation of how the narrative evolves for each of the orders you can do the narrative in.
Mm-hmm.
So in every way, it feels logical, right? And you can see that copied in Mass Effect 2, and you can see that copied in Mass Effect 3 again. But I think after how they did that in Mass Effect 1, you kind of see that specific story type, the way they've done that, you see it explode across games to the point where you even see it in like God of War, which the latest God of War used a very similar like open up, open back down, open up, open back down sort of system. They just did it more than once. And I think that's really cool. I mean, I'm sure there were games before Mass Effect that had played with it. You would assume something like Deus Ex had also played with, sort of like figuring things out and doing things. But those games were still meaningfully linear
Mm-hmm.
in how you progress through the mission structure. Mass Effect, I can't remember a game before that had really pulled that off with that type of story, with that type of place.
Have you played Arcanum?
Yeah,
Okay.
my God.
So Arcanum is, I believe, a game. I'm pretty sure it came out before Mass Effect. I'd be shocked if it didn't. It feels
No, it did.
ancient.
That must have been early 2000s.
Yeah, it must have been. Arcanum, I believe, is a game that had a very similar structure. It's a type of game I don't think will ever be made again,
Right.
basically, because it was incredibly open ended to the point that the first time I played the game, I completely didn't see what was special about it and was very disappointed. And then the second time I played the game, I thought I was playing a completely different game. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Arcanum, but it's like on topic because it had similar narrative structure. But in Arcanum, the choice of character you made at the beginning and what stats you rolled changed your experience exponentially, like really in a huge way. The first time I picked a typical like warrior type character, and put very little points in charm and intelligence. And because of that, I had almost no dialogue options. All my dialogue options were like grunts. And nobody joined my party to the point that I didn't even know it was possible for characters to join your party. And everyone picked a fight with me all the time. And then the second time I played, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try like something different because people are saying this game is like incredible, and I just don't see it. So I put no stats in anything offensive, and I put everything in charisma and intelligence. And I had a party of 6 people, some of which were bosses that I fought in my first run. Like there were people that I would like walk up, say the wrong thing, they'd shoot at me, I'd have to fight them back. Now they're joining me, and it was elaborate. And they had these like those missions that collapse the narrative that you're talking about. The way that they were resolved are completely different depending on which type of character you have. Sometimes a character that follows you unlocks dialogue options that allows you just to convince the people to let you through. Other times you could fool them. Other times you had to fight them. That was super interesting. So I feel like some studios dabbled with it before. Mass Effect basically made it mass market.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's probably the best way to look at it. Like, yeah, from what I remember, and I'm not quite sure if this is right, but I think Arcanum was either an inspiration or made by some of the people that were also involved in Neverwinter Nights.
Yes, I believe so.
And Neverwinter Nights was obviously a BioWare title.
Yeah.
So the sort of like growth is there. I think what they nailed with Mass Effect was sort of like still figuring out how to put a really strong 3-act structure into the game.
Yeah.
Which I felt with personally, and I know some people are going to disagree with me, but I felt that Neverwinter Nights never quite captured that sense, that feeling of like a strong 3-act structure.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of felt like here's a bunch of missions, here's a bunch of things you can do, go do these things. And Mass Effect really, for me, for the first time, felt like, okay, like you have that full freedom to do what you want, even though in many ways it's far more constricted than in Neverwinter Nights or in Arcanum. This one felt freer. Maybe I'm just also like, I'm very into space.
It's interesting to note that, like as you guys are mentioning the growth, into like what Mass Effect ended up being, it's interesting to note like how the studio, going like through Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter's Night, also worked on Star Wars for quite some time. So like they've managed to nail down the space opera kind of feel, right? And like a lot of like the RPG kind of systems. And I think at some point they were like, what if we like make our own Star Wars kind of game that ended up becoming Mass Effect? Like the lore building, the different species, how every one of those species have those very distinct statistics. It's like, clearly made out of like a dungeon master that really understands Star Wars and space operas of the like, that decided to make their own.
Absolutely.
You can see that within the DNA of Mass Effect, which is, I think, is fascinating. And I think why it probably remains one of the strongest worlds in video games is because of there's a lot of that happened behind the scene, and it's years of growth for that studio to come out with this kind of a product at the end of it.
Absolutely. It feels like something that was brewing in the minds of people before the actual started production. It just feels that deep. Whether that's true or not, or whether it's just like their experience mounting from working on other games, that's what it feels like. You know what? There's a difference between when you tell someone, okay, come up with a sci-fi, we're starting working on we're starting production now, and if someone's been thinking about it for a long time and like drawing all the lines and connections, like there's the outcome, the end result feels different. It's like Nolan's movies, like Inception, for example, where you can feel that he's been giving it a lot of thought because of all the symbolism that's like deep into it. It's not something they didn't just ask for a script by the end of the week. Clearly,
yeah. We spoke about this in a podcast before. Like the output, or like a game or any artistic piece of work, is ultimately the collection of the creator's experiences. Right. So whether those experiences is like, things you've done in your life, or things that your own personal experience, or like, games that you've built before. And we spoke, I think at the time we spoke about how developers that worked on Gears of War, for example, that DNA ended up showing up in one of their games. So like, I think I find that very interesting always to like, as we play the games, to look at the creators and the kind of games they built before, and you kind of see how that experience kind of builds on top of the other until you get to understand the product that you're looking at.
My favorite for that is with indies. Like you grab in a game and you can usually tell by now with the travel I've done and going around the world, I can usually tell if I know the indie, which indie it is, but more importantly, which country they're from or what culture they live in. Because it turns out culture also leaves a pretty big fingerprint on how games are made. And like, if a game has a very specific mechanic or identity, I can usually track back where it's probably from. From like the way it's built, or the way it plays, or the way a certain jump feels. And that's the jump from, that's the jump that they used in the Poppenkast. So probably Scandinavia or West Europe. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's wild how you can draw that. I really wish I could write that sort of stuff down, but it's all gut feelings.
No, but there are essays. I've read essays about the similar topics. Like I remember, this was even a long time ago, but I remember in college I read an essay about how a lot of Japanese animations dealt with a giant, like dangerous force that comes from outer space that wants to destroy Tokyo right after World War II. And that kind of story was like not existent in Japanese folklore before, but they had like a huge monumental historic event that shaped many of the stories going forward. That makes sense. And like, they treat it very differently than any other culture. Like they don't, no other culture has that similar story. So it makes perfect sense. And there's been writings on it too.
But I think a lot of people then try to map that to narrative. But I guess my thesis is that it applies to everything, right? It applies to art, it applies to game design, which we normally see as sort of like abstract and then globalized. But they're not. They're also very local in many ways. And the way we think about design is localized, which what Fauzi was saying about KOTOR, about Knights of the Old Republic. Shows that that's very true, right? Like in a studio, there's a design culture, and that design culture is localized, and that gets expressed through the creators, and it gets emphasized in those creators as they work there. And then when they leave and they go somewhere else, they take a little bit of that DNA with them. to other projects.
And it ended up showing like in work that's going on behind that. I remember in Japan, like I had a lot of friends that worked old school in Namco Bandai, and we had like a very interesting conversation that night. We had also people from Sega about like the rise of 3D fighters, for example. So like. Virtual Fighter was amongst the first that started to do that specific type of 3D animation in fighting games, and the creators, some of the key team members of that game, left Sega and joined Namco, and that's how Tekken came to be.
Nice.
And we were talking about like how like those two series are now vastly different, but still like there's a lot of kind of kinhood between those two games, because there's a lot of that shared experience kind of migrated from one place to the other. And because
the exact same thing happened with Street Fighter and the series that later became King of Fighters, where some of the people who worked on Street Fighter 2, they went on to make Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury, and those two games became King of Fighters later. That's incredible.
I was about to say that. So it's like amongst the reason why fighting games in Japan, for example, were way more advanced towards us in the West is because fighting games that came out in the West were inspired by those games that came out at first. But still, from a design point of view, they had to make a lot of decisions either by themselves or to get inspired by their own mistakes, or to just take an entirely different trajectory and create their own. Whereas there's the creators that made Street Fighter, they stumbled into a bunch of things, being the pioneers in that particular direction of design, then making all these mistakes. Then some of them move to another team that go like, I want to make things differently than what I made them in Street Fighter, but I still got to take all the learnings I had from Street Fighter with me in building this new game. And then you get stuff like Fatal Fury, like King of Fighters, like stuff like that.
Exactly. The combo systems work so differently. You can feel the difference when you're talking about games like Virtua Fighter or Tekken, and you could feel how similar they are when you're talking about Street Fighter and King of Fighters. So it's really interesting that you can draw a line and say, okay, this is where the inspiration is if you know the games intimately enough.
Exactly.
That's gameplay we're talking about. Yeah, exactly.
When we're making games, generally, you end up in a room with a bunch of game makers, and then at almost every game or every mechanic or anything, you get to a point in which two game makers, one say we should do A, and the other say we could do B, and there isn't a clear right or wrong at this point, right?
Right.
So either A or B could work, and then going in either direction ends up becoming the game that it is. For some people, A might be the success that ends up defining what the game or franchise is, and that continues to build on A for a long period of time. But there might be developers that goes like, I want to see what happens if we chose B, and then those guys move over and start off their own thing, building a mechanic on what that option B is, and it's all about that. Eventually, any game design decision is a decision. We stop at the point to go like, we could either do this or that. And depends on what we decide, it becomes a completely different game in some cases in either way.
I think it's fun because I think for one of the exercises I usually give starting design students if they end up in a consultancy call or something is I always try to tell them like, okay, so make me a simple platformer and then make the jump. Right, just to design a jump, basic jump, and that's all I want. And after they're done with that task, I ask them about why they set the gravity the way they did.
Yep.
Right, instead of the jump itself, and it's fun because it's a question where they just kind of make an assumption for a number and then continue. But those are decisions too, right? A lot of the invisible decisions that we just sort of automatically make are decisions, and usually they come from us knowing kind of what we want to go. We're just going with Earth gravity. We're just setting gravity to 1. We're just like, we'll see what happens. But a lot of very simple, straightforward choices are actually some of the most defining choices we make.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Because everything else is built around it.
Yeah, it's one of the things I tell my students as when I try to build their skill set to analyze games. And because I believe that you become a better designer if you can analyze games better. And the rule of thumb I give them is that whenever you're playing any kind of video game, at any point in time, at anything you look at, stop yourself and ask yourself why. Why is that thing like this? Or why is that thing there? And I tell them, I know this, this is with 1,000 degrees of certainty. Any tiny thing in whatever game you're playing, there's a group of game developers that sat down in a meeting room or around a table or in a Burger King for hours debating, for hours.
Yes.
To discussing like this should be this shade of blue, or this arrow should point in this degree of direction. Anything that you've seen in a video game, as a result of hours of deliberation of developers until they finally go like, I guess we'll do this, or they ran out of time, and that's what we ended up with. But there's always a reason.
I kind of love this because you can tell sort of the different backgrounds between us, Fauzi, from this one. Because I'm going all the way back to like the smallest mechanic I can find as like because I was Flambert, right? Our entire game design was on like 2 or 3 basic mechanics that work together in interesting ways, and then the feeling of the button, right? That was for us. It was always the kinesthetics, right? The feeling of pressing the button, pulling the trigger, and you're talking about like how, like, what is on the screen, how it's communicating to the player, why it's there, what the technical limitations might have been for that wall to be there. And sure, there's implied there's also like the buttons, and in my thing, it's implied that there's also how the game looks. Yeah. We're just saying the same thing from different points of view, kind of proving what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So, like, academically, like, looking at your games, Rami, I'll be like, those guys are clearly focused on making that button feel really, really good. Why? There must be a reason, right? So I start to think about it. Oh, that's a team of 2. Okay. That could be one answer. Like they're trying to get to hammer in on this particular core experience. So, or like, that game is touch screen. So, that one movement needs to matter a lot in that case. And then, like you start to come up with hypotheses. And this is one of the favorite things I had going into conferences early on, is that I would have played the game or like had my list of reasons for why. And then I meet the developer and go like, all right, so there's no press, there's no bit around here. I have a bunch of questions. How did you, why did you make these calls? I think it was that. Was that right or wrong? And then many of those are long life friends. And we had a lot of these discussions. But there's always an answer to that question of why did they do this,
Exactly. And that's the thing I tell my students as well, is that a lot of times I ask them, why did you make this decision? And most of the times, like, well, I saw that in this game. And one of the important that's not necessarily the wrong answer, but one of the important things to ask yourself is, but what problem were they trying to solve with that decision? Like, not every, like, basically they were looking for a solution to something. Are you trying to solve the same problem? Can you even identify what problem do you have? Like, you have to take it back one step further. And it's actually one of these conversations that you're talking about how game designers come into a room. A lot of times it boils down to people saying, well, I saw this in this game and it didn't work. But that doesn't necessarily mean it won't work in our game. That's something that you have to detach yourself from. They were trying to solve a different problem. And maybe because of the other systems, it's so interconnected and complicated, maybe introducing that solution in their game would have caused a different problem, where that problem wouldn't exist in our game.
We learned that one painfully back at Vlaambert, because a lot of my design knowledge actually is non-academic, right? Well, it used to be non-academic. We just kind of learned by doing.
Yeah, which is the best way, if you ask me.
We thought the academics were a little stuck up, and the books were bullshit. We're not, But I'm gonna have to.
The truth is somewhere. No, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right?
But now that I'm a little more grown up and I've come to know a lot of these academics, I know that they have a different way of trying to codify the same information, right? Some do it through practice, some do it through theory, some do it through a mix of both, and they're all useful in different ways. Anyway, so I wasn't academically trained for game design, and we were making an RPG back at Vlaambert, and we wanted an inventory system. And we just kind of went like, wouldn't it be cool to do the inventory system like in Diablo? Right, so you have this inventory system. It's a grid, and every item has a shape, and you can put more stuff in the inventory if you sort of Tetris the items around, right? And then 3 weeks later, we canceled the project because at that point we suddenly had scrolls of identify, where you could identify items that were undefined, but you knew the shape. But it's a fun risk reward thing, and so we ended up just so much of Diablo's design turns turns out hinges on the shape of that inventory.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Because that's your central risk reward. That's the entire thing. Like, am I going to bring this item, and am I not going to bring this item? Sure, you're also fighting, but that's not really the core of Diablo. The core of Diablo is getting a cool item.
Yeah.
You're fighting to get the items.
Exactly.
Right. The fighting is not the point.
That you hopefully have the space for, because you're carrying other items to help you get the item.
Exactly. So as soon as we copied that, we were stuck in a lot of Diablo's design decisions because they naturally flowed from that decision. Exactly. And that was not the game we were trying to make. We weren't making a loot game. We just thought it would be a cool inventory to copy. So we made a rule that we can't refer to other games. It's a little bit harsh, but it's a very Vlambeer way of approaching things. It's like, okay, you can describe mechanics from other games, but you can't say like in Diablo. So
that's clever.
From that point on, we had to say like, okay, so an inventory system that is grid based, that you can put items in and the items have a shape. That's it. And it helped. It wasn't perfect. We still made similar mistakes, but it really helped because it also forced us to analyze why we wanted certain things.
That's great. The thing is, like when you are making a game design decision, right? A lot of people have this misconception. There's like really good game designers that just dream up a concept and then that concept just works magically. Like I've just felt like imagine this and now I tried it and it works from the first time. That as any person that ever made a game will tell you, that's not true in any way. But so like the one way for us to really know that a mechanic works is to have experienced it. We either experienced it because we've experienced it before in another game, or we prototype it. Prototyping it could be that we kind of know where this is going, but we iterate until we see where we end up. Or we stumble upon something that works. In all of these cases, you absolutely know that it works once we get there. So like we have to have experienced it in some way, shape or another, either in your own game or through your own experimentation or in another game, in order for you to say this thing works with any degree of certainty, right?
I think the thing I always have to explain to people is the thing people get wrong about game development is that they think that we're all very good at it, right? But they think we're very good at it in the wrong way.
Yeah,
we're not good at it in the way that we know what to do. We just know how to get to what to do.
Yeah,
right. That's the thing game developers get good at. Like it's not like we sit there, we go, okay, these mechanics we're going to do. And then, we just say, we're going to do this. We're going to have wall running. We're going to do double jump. The levels are going to go from here to here. The story is going to go from there to there. Let's do that. And then we do that, right? That's what a lot of people think game development is like. Well, the reality is kind of like, okay, so is wall jump good? Shall we just try some wall jump? And then we spent like 2 months trying to figure out whether wall jump works. And then we go from there, and then we try to figure out how to get from wall jump to something else that's fun. Like a lot of people think that game development comes with like sort of like a strict plan. Well, in reality, usually 3 months before launch, we're still being like, "Oh God, I'm not sure about this still. You think we have like a month and a half left? Do you think should we still push on this?
Yes.
What happens if we cut it? If we cut it, do we still have? Yeah, do we have time to cut it? We don't have time to cut it.
That's I think one thing that we're missing, and it's understandable that we're missing it. But I don't know if you two have the same shared experience. But have you ever, when you were kids, did you ever design a game on the fly with your friends? Like,
oh yeah,
you know what? When you're just in the schoolyard and you have things, and you're like, okay, it's like soccer, but we're going to use this ball because this is all we have, and there's no nets, so we're just going to put these two things, which means we can't have a goalie because that nobody was able to score for the last 5 minutes. And the confidence at which you make these iterative changes on the fly while playing the game without starting over. That's the kind of thing that eventually, like because of our experience, we don't do as much because like we see the probabilities, we see the future. When you're kids, you're like, we'll make this change and we'll adapt because we don't know what's like we're not thinking beyond that.
Let's try this brick as a ball.
Yeah.
because we don't have a ball.
That lasts for one kick, and you're like,
Yeah,
okay.
okay. Let's try and find a ball. I understand why there's a ball. This one, I play for laughs, but this one actually happened in my life.
Wait,
Yeah.
the break?
Well, yeah, when I was a kid in Egypt, we didn't always have a soccer ball. So every now and then we would just in front of my house. It was sort of like our house in Egypt. There was sort of like this sandy kind of road. It wasn't a main street, so it was kind of the sandy road, and there was a wall, and near the wall would always be these very beautiful round stones, right?
Hmm.
And we would use those as a soccer ball if we wouldn't have a soccer ball. So we just and they were smooth, right? They weren't sharp,
No.
but they were still stones,
Oh
so
my
they
God.
hurt a lot. And some of us would be playing barefoot, so it was kind of an unfair game. So
The closest I could think of, and I have a vivid memory of this. You know those like milk cartons, those plastic milk cartons. We wanted to play basketball, and there was no net, so we took some of those and we propped them up, and we started playing basketball with those. But nobody was able to score at any
mhm.
point. And then, like at one point, I forget one of us was like, "Wait, does the ball fit?" And we brought it down, and we had to like squeeze and push hard for the ball to even
Oh
fit.
my god.
You're like, okay, that's why nobody was able to score for the longest time. Like we eyeballed it, we like started playing. We still had a lot of fun until someone was like, "Hey, that one like was as close as it could be, and it still didn't go in. Something's wrong."
Right. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, no, it's true. But I like that. I think I was maybe we were all. I'm guessing since we all ended up in game design, we were probably very similar in that we all made games. Like there, we all came up with rules. For me, when I was doing the chess program in high school and elementary school that I talked about, the teacher taught us to come up with our own rules. Right. That was
Yeah.
part of how I grew up. But yeah, I was doing that before that, like coming up with like play worlds for Lego or like a little mat with like cars on it, and like suddenly it was Grand Theft Auto, right?
Yes, of
And
course.
that just worked. And it's kind of sad, honestly, that you part of you loses that, right? I remember the day where those little figurines in my hand on the mat didn't feel like Grand Theft Auto anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and you just kind of look at them and you're like, wow, these were magic before, but now they're not. Um, and it took me a while to sort of recapture that. You know that? Like
Uh-huh.
it genuinely took me until my late 20s probably before I could just sit down. And it's usually because there's a kid nearby.
Yes, that's what I was gonna
Right?
say.
When you see the magic in somebody else, it just comes back for you. Um, but
That's
yeah,
exactly my experience. Like one of my favorite things to do is to make games with my kids. Like we make board games and video games and card games together, and it's that seeing them make the decision and pushing forward and having the confidence that brings it back with me. We're like, okay, I'm going to stop thinking about the repercussions here, and we're going to dive in and
right.
explore this together. I also remember like a little bit on topic. I used to watch movies like as a kid. I loved movies like The Goonies. You know those movies where you have like these kids that come together and like make makeshift things that would never really work in real life. But back then, as
I
a kid, it just like
still, I
opens up
still
your
have never seen
imagination.
it.
Oh, it
Never
doesn't
seen it.
have to be The Goonies itself, but like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
that theme of movie
A
where it's
group
like
of kids going on an adventure somewhere.
exactly, and they usually have
Lord
some.
of the Rings.
Kind of.
It's close.
Kind of.
I remember
Way less
as
orcs.
I genuinely so people refer to that genre of movie so often, and I don't think I've ever seen a movie like it. Like
Okay.
Home Alone is the closest I can think of.
Home Alone is close, but it's only one kid. It only has
It's one
that.
kid.
Yeah, it only has that makeshift like thing. A more recent one that I had recommended in a previous episode that you should watch is Finding Ohana. That
Oh,
one
yeah.
is like very Goonies like, and it does capture that magic. In my opinion, it's really good, especially
Okay.
if you. I don't know if you'll appreciate it because you haven't watched a similar type of movies as a kid. So, but
Right.
I'd be interested to find out. But those movies, we loved them as kids. They just opened up the possibilities of like the magic. I think there's one by Steven Spielberg too that came out like 10 years ago that was similar. I forget what it's called. I have to try to remember. But like, okay,
Stranger Things.
no. Well,
Oh.
Stranger Things has a similar vibe, by the way. That is a very Goonies
Oh,
vibe. Yeah, it
okay.
does. The kids that concoct ideas and go on adventures
Totally.
together. It does capture that childhood, absolutely.
I didn't watch it either.
You should definitely watch it just to see at least if you like that genre.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. But I remember like one of those movies. I can't remember which one. The kids would not say each other's names. They would all have the same whistle, and depending on how they blew the whistle, they would call each other. And me and my friends were like, "Okay, that's what we're gonna do too." And that lasted like a day. Because like we were trying to figure out which kind of sounds from the whistles would call each person. Everyone kept mixing it up. At the end, they're like, it's just easier to call each other by name. I don't think there's actually a purpose for this. But for that one, the hour before we figured out how bad it was, we were so excited and full of life and discovery. That kind of thing is like, it does leave you when you're older, and it's kind of sad. I really wish we could find a way to recapture that.
I think it's like one of the things I tell a lot of like my design students as well is that one of the things that originates to creativity and originality a lot is that if you can, as an adult, reach back to your childlike sense of wonder, because the sense of wonder, like for kids, for example. The world is a much larger, most mysterious place than they can imagine. For them, like, the world is full of mystery. They don't know how it works. So they need to rely on their imagination to kind of explain how some of the things that we know how it works. For them, it just, some kind of magic happens. Like what happens to your tooth under the pillow, or like what happens to where do babies come from? They get dropped in by birds. A lot of the things that are completely reasonable and logical, and we have a scientific explanation for kids. All of this is magical and mystical. And therefore, they try to fill in the blank with their imagination as much as possible. And when you see adults, especially game developers, tap into that sense of wonder, is when they come up with like those really crazy creative ideas. I think I once on this podcast also spoke about how Miyamoto used to look into the pipes as a kid, for example.
Right.
And then like he would imagine that he'd come out at a different world, or how he used to imagine himself, fighting in the fields of Kyoto, and that ended up becoming Zelda. Keita Takahashi also he used to. There's a game the kids play called Tomogarashi, in which like two kids are rolling a ball. And then Keita Takahashi reflected on his childhood, and he made Katamari Damacy based on that.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So like a lot of these things kind of based on your childhood experiences, and if you can tap into that sense of wonder and translate that into a game of some sort or another experience, you'd end up becoming like, you can end up tapping into new creative or original ideas or something of the sort. Like Osama was mentioning the shows that he used to watch as a kid. I grew up watching a lot of Takeshi's Castle. In Arabic, it's called Al-Husn. If you guys know that, it's like a game show that a lot of the kids of my age in the Middle East ended up growing. It was like, it's a lot of obstacle courses that you need to pass through, and it's hilarious. If you guys have never watched this, I can't recommend it enough. I think it still stands. It still stands. And there was this one course that used to called Al Mamar Al Khatar, or like the dangerous passageway, in which like you need to walk past like a very thin crease next to the wall, and there's all sorts of stuff being flung at you by those fun enemies. And I used to recreate that in the recess yard. So like I'll have the kids like line up, and they start moving around, and I have like a group of enemy kids that are throwing like water balloons and like trying to like pull stuff from under the other kids' feet until they try to reach to the end line. that was a lot of fun. I think as a kid I had the dream, like I would have wanted to be part of Takeshi's Castle if I could.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, it's still possible. It's still possible. But the place where I find this most interesting is actually sci-fi. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, but if you go back like 60 years in sci-fi writing, right, we didn't know what was on Venus, right? So the sci-fi books are all like dinosaurs on Venus, and like people in like little cloths, like basically like living like the early humans, like that was what we imagined.
Yes,
exactly, because we'd never been there. We couldn't imagine what was there, so we just made up stuff that seemed logical based on what we thought. And then you kind of extrapolate from that, and sci-fi actually kind of gets more boring over time, because you can see the exploration of our solar system in the type of sci-fi that we're writing, and we're kind of losing that naivete of our our solar system
You're
is.
right. Martians changed from little green men to becoming humans who moved there because the Earth got destroyed or got
Right.
polluted.
So
And
it's
yeah.
it's the kind of stuff where in sci-fi you can always kind of see where we're losing our naivete, like most, because it's always riding on like, now we're riding on like genetic. Everybody's riding on like genetic or cybernetic enhancements, right?
Yeah.
And like all the wildest stuff comes up from there, right? And then in 20, 30 years, maybe that's more normal and that topic will have gone away and we'll look back and we'll read that and be like, oh, we thought so many things. Flying cars, things on Venus. But I will admit, same thing as a kid. Like there used to be on the recess yard, there used to be this skipping thing. You know the ones, kind of like a drawn thing on the ground that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then
It's
3 and 4 are
hopscotch.
next to each other. Hopscotch,
hopscotch.
sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. That one. It's so funny when you speak English fluently, but you just realize there's entire parts of vocabulary you've never had to use. I can't name a single bird in English. Why would I know what a bird is named? I've never had to name a bird. I know there's like a raven because it gets used in fantasy a lot.
Raven and chicken, that's all you need. That's all you need.
But then people go like, "Oh yeah, that's a that," and I'm like, "What is that?" And they're like, "It's a what's the word? It's a robin." I'm like, "What's a robin?" They're like, "That's a robin." I'm like, "That's a bird." Yes. That's that bird. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that bird has a name. That makes sense."
It's an edible chicken.
Right. Believe me, enough spices, any bird is an edible chicken.
Don't knock it till you've tried it, Fauzi.
Fair enough.
But the hopscotch thing, I would use that as a spaceship. Me and my friends would sit in it, and one of us would sit at the front where the 10 was, and we would just pretend it was a spaceship and fly around the universe in the recess yard until people realized we were nerds and started annoying us. But the fantasy of that was there. I think
we used to use it. Actually, we played. I don't know if any. Like I'm Canadian, so I don't know how many other people know what curling is. I don't know how widespread it is around the world. But we used to play.
Not that widespread.
Look up curling if you don't know what it is.
It's the one where you slide tea kettles over the ice, right?
Yes, exactly that. That's the best way to describe it.
And you use brooms to let the teacup slide faster.
Oh my God, curling sounds so ridiculous when explained by people who don't know curling. But we used to play a form of curling on those hopscotch, drawings with marbles. It's like we wanted to see if you could get the marble at in a certain point and knock out other people's marbles. But we just used the lines of the hopscotch and we made up our own rules. And it didn't really work because we used to be able to capture other people's marbles. So it relied on you remembering which marble was yours because they weren't color coded or anything like that. So usually it just... Yeah, we didn't use brooms. It was just a marble.
You need to use that little brush that they use for fingerprints. You know that?
Osama, you all came up with the most complicated version of jeu de boule I've ever heard.
I don't know what that is.
It's basically exactly what you described. They just use small cannonballs instead of, but they throw or roll the ball and then try to get it as close to the goal as possible. It's basically curling with cannonballs.
Oh, okay.
Instead of tea kettles.
Rami doesn't know the name of a single bird, but knows ancient pirate games.
Listen, as soon as it's a game, I'll probably know about it. If it's not a game, no idea. Close. I'm out.
I don't know about this game. I have to look it up, but thank you. Curling, it's marbles, but with cannonballs. That sounds incredible. I got to play that.
I love it. It sounds like a lot of high stakes.
Yeah.
We used to play a lot of marbles growing up as well, but we had those rules. Like if you win in some of the games, you get to keep your and your opponent's marbles, which can be popular with some kids, unpopular with others. This is one of the few things in which my relatively large size as a kid ended up being in my benefit. Like, I'm going to take these marbles. You're going to do something about it? No, that's what I thought.
I should have been your friend when I was a kid. I would have had so many marbles.
Actually, our playground was pretty much split in half, with half the people refusing to play with Auntie, like to give up their marbles, and the other half, like that's the only way they played. And I think that's kind of how like MMO servers ended up splitting up too, like the PvP versus the PvE.
Love it.
So I bet you whoever designed that used to play marbles as a kid. Playgrounds.
I don't know. I mean, there was those games I played, and then most of the other games involved running away from people you like.
Yeah.
you
There's
got
a
in
lot of
trouble with.
running. There's a lot of running.
There's like you play soccer, and you hit somebody's window, and it's like, it's time to run. And in Egypt, you got really good at running in different directions, so that only one of the kids would get caught.
What I really didn't understand as a kid is that, like, why did our neighbors really flip out when our ball got caught under their car? Like, it didn't hit anything. It's under the car. I'm going there to get it.
Have you seen the cars in Egypt? There's no way that would do more damage than just how people drive it.
Exactly.
That soccer ball is not going to create damage to your car if your car does not have two mirrors anymore and the front bumper is sliding on the ground. We are really not the difference.
Also, calling it a soccer ball was like an overstatement, because that thing was a spherical object full of socks. But calling it a soccer ball was a major promotion to what it actually was.
Oh God! I hope there are new socks at least.
No. Why would you put new socks in there? Put old socks.
Oh God!
That thing had no bounce whatsoever. And if it hits you in the face, it's double fatality, because it's heavy, it hurts, and it stinks.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of marbles growing up as a kid. There was
biking. We biked everywhere.
I didn't have a bike in Egypt, but also the neighborhood that we were in was not very good for bikes. I think
too many cars.
A lot of cars, not a lot of like places to bike, and just there wasn't anywhere to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had, like, when I grew up, we lived in Rod al Farag, which is the fish market neighborhood. So basically, if you went one way, you smelled like fish, and it was cars everywhere. If you went the other way, it was just kind of like the same type of street for like 25 minutes. So there just wasn't many places to go. There was enough to do there. And then later, when we moved to Mu'attam in Cairo, which was the other side of the country, I think we were kind of over the biking age.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
We had a couple of kids.
I'm still not over the biking age now, but I get what you mean.
We only had 2 kids in my neighborhood that had bikes, and like those kids used to charge 10 cents to give you a spin. So like they would come into like the big parking lot close to the neighborhood, and then like they'll be there in their bikes, and then they start ringing their bells. And like all the other kids come in, and like, with myself included, I go like, I want to ride. And I'd be like, you were fast in returning the bike last time, so I'll give it to you for 5 cents. And I give him 5 cents, and I take it for 2 rides around the parking lot, and they give it back. It was, or like sometimes I could manage to like negotiate, obviously with a bit of haggling. I was like, I'll give you 2 cents and 1 marble, and he was like, 1 marble, I want 3. And then we started haggling until I finally could get the bike ride for like a marble and a half or something like that.
Right.
I'm just curious, if not everyone had a bike, was that how you learned to ride a bike? By like, paying someone 10 cents and like how did the kids who never rode a bike do that? Did you just figure it out?
In my neighborhood, we just learned that way. Like, a couple of kids will have the bikes, and then they will either lend it to their friends or rent it, give them spins or something like that. My dad eventually bought me a bike as well.
Yeah, I don't know.
But my mom had this rule of like, you're never allowed to leave the parking lot, which kind of defeat the purpose. So I ended up trading bike rides for marbles as well. The cycle of life continues.
Of course. No, I was just curious about that, but yeah, the shared experiences across the world with kids making up their own games and playing bikes. That's really special.
Rob, say something about how you learned.
I mean, I was Dutch.
Oh, fair
So
enough.
I learned to bike in the Netherlands, and actually part of the reason I don't think I got a bike in Egypt is that I learned to ride in the Netherlands. So I was
Yeah.
doing things with like indicating which direction I would go, and like stopping at intersection. My mom was probably like, "If he tries that here, he's dead." So, and she's not wrong. Like,
She's not wrong.
she's not wrong. No, but I think that's always one of my favorite things about kids play. No matter where you go, right? No matter where I've traveled around the world, the thing about kids play is that it always finds a way.
Yeah.
Right? It always finds a way, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter how good or bad things are. Kids will always find a way to play with something, with anything, because it's just it's the natural state of humans, I think, and we kind of teach it out of ourselves, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see that I mean, soccer obviously in the Arab world is huge for kids, for a lot of kids.
Most of the
And
world
then there,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, most of the world, I guess. But like I like how in the Arab world it was on the streets everywhere,
Yes.
right? It makes me wonder though. This really makes me wonder. Like there weren't that many girls playing soccer with us.
My sisters would play soccer with us when we were young, but not
Yeah.
exactly the
Same for me, actually.
There's a lot of
I don't know.
skipping rope I remember from my sisters.
Oh, skipping
Yeah.
rope.
Yeah.
Skipping
Yeah, I
rope,
saw that a lot.
hopscotch. I need to have Habibti on the show one time. And
We didn't have
listen to
Habibti
their
on the show to talk
experience.
about this.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely should have a Habib Jan, but not for this episode because this episode is over. So thank you all very much for joining us.
Wait. Yes. I have one more thing. If everything's okay, when we're recording, it's not entirely sure, but if everything's okay at this point, check online to see, because there is a Palestine bundle in support of the humanitarian crisis that is happening in Palestine right now. There is a bundle full of great video games that you can get right now on itch.io. So if you want to support Palestine, do check out the itch.io bundle that is available now. Anything helps really with rebuilding their lives, their homes, and it won't bring the people that passed away back, but hopefully it will help build. It will help rebuild. So go check that out on itch.io. Just wanted to shout that out real quick.
Thank you for that, Rami, Alana, and everyone else who's involved in that. And that's it for this week. So thank you again, and salam.
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 That was the Habibis podcast for this week. I'm Osama Dorias, your host for this episode. You can find me on Twitter at Osama Dorias. My fellow Habibis were Rami Ismail, you can find on Twitter at @THA_Rami, and Fawzi Mesmar, who you can find on Twitter at Fawzi Mesmar. Send us your questions, stories, suggestions via info@thehabibis.com. Intro and outro music was provided by Malik Zubayla, and the logo was provided by Ibrahim Hamdi. The Habibis is a weekly podcast about 3 game developers drinking good Arab tea, with new episodes launching every Friday, inshallah. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcasting service, or check out thehabibis.com for more information. Thank you for listening, and Assalamu alaikum.